call the Board of Equalization meeting back to order, and I've asked Attorney Colling to explain where we left off and what we have left to do this afternoon. So, Mr. Colling.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the last Board of Equalization meeting was April 16th. You did take action on some matters before the Board of Equalization as far as approving exemptions and additions to the property assessment list. You did also, as a Board of Equalization, correct and equalize the assessment rolls as they pertain to identified properties in the assessment list that Mr. Hirschfeld and Vanguard Appraising had made recommendations for adjustment. So those properties have been corrected and adjusted as pertains to the Board of Equalization. You did hold over final approval and acceptance of the assessment rolls. So what would be left for this meeting is to make any further equalization or correction of the assessment rolls that you deem proper, as well as to hear the report from Mr. Hirschfeld in the assessor's office regarding the level of assessment and report on their property classes and any adjustments that they would recommend. The Century Code provision does allow the Board of Equalization to adjourn from day to day until the work of the board is completed. So you do have the ability to adjourn from time to time and hold over a correction and equalization of the roll. The finalized roll will go from here to the County Board of Equalization, which I believe will meet first of June, or first part of June, to equalize and correct rolls as it pertains to all of Stark County. Mr. President, I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Are there any questions for Mr. Colling? One question I would have, Mr. Colling, would it be your recommendation that we act on any of the changes that Mr. Hirschfeld may have made since last meeting, and then open it up for members of the public to address us, or have members of the public address us first and then address the changes?
Mr. President, I think it'd be appropriate for Mr. Hirschfeld to report on corrections and adjustments that his office has made, and then hear from the public at that time before you would take a final vote to equalize and correct rolls.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Hirschfeld, then, do you have a report to give?
Mr. President, Commissioners, I do. Would you also like me to go through the level of assessment, or hold off on that and just go over the parcels that were corrected first?
Why don't we do the parcels that you corrected first since we last met?
Very good. Under item 4 on our agenda, I do have 3 enclosures within this. One enclosure has all the parcels that were reviewed and may or may not have been corrected. The second attachment is for the parcels that were in Heartland Village that were corrected. And then the third is just a recap of what Vanguard Appraisals had corrected at the last meeting. So we had several property owners came in since the last meeting. There were adjustments made to land on several of those. And there were a couple of improved properties that we also adjusted. As I stated earlier, there were many more that we went over with the property owners, and there were no changes made. In addition to the number of commercial properties that were here, and which were also reviewed with Vanguard Appraisals remotely, and we also had 3 residential properties that we reviewed. The 3 of those persons being those who came to the Board of Equalization meeting in the April date. Are there any of those in there that you would like more clarification on?
So we should be looking at the enclosure that begins with the Sellinger property?
Correct.
Okay. So are there any other changes that you listed these?
I do have one additional change, thank you. And that would be parcel 0664-0100-1700. That is the commercial property that is part of the Riverside Estates subdivision that was recently platted. There are two active utility easements going through that property that prevent it from being improved to its highest and best use. And after sitting down with that borrower, we came to an agreement, and that the valuation on that property has been reduced from $473,800 to $355,000. That would be the only addition to this list.
All right.
And then in regards to the properties in Heartland Village, subsequent to the commercial revaluation, those properties were left on a residential map factor, which increased the value by another 20%. And so we corrected that to reflect the commercial map factor, which decreased all of these properties in here about that 20% level. And those 600 and some odd parcels have been platted individually, so instead of having one nice mobile home park, we have several individual properties, and that, therefore the list is quite long, but they all suffer the same problems.
All right. Anything else?
And that would be it for changes.
Okay. So then, Mr. Colling, at this time, it would be appropriate to ask for public comment.
That's correct, Mr. President.
So anyone from the public that would wish to comment regarding their property may do so now. You just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Good afternoon.
My name is Gary Bleth, and I'm here on several properties today. The reason I wasn't at the last meeting is that we met with Joe about 15 minutes before the meeting last time. We were going to address these, we were going to talk about these two properties at that particular time. Really wasn't given any consideration from what we saw, so I'm back here today. The first properties that I'm going to talk about are the State Avenue office condos. Those are the ones on Fairway of State over there. About 2 years ago, Vanguard came in and they redid the valuations on these. I met with these people for at least an hour, went through the particulars of this condo association, the shared bathrooms, so on and so forth. 3 years ago, this property was at, the one that of mine was at $148,000. Went up to 223 in December of 13, or whenever it did in 13, the beginning of 13. There was also an appraisal done on these properties over there about that time, and it came in light a couple weeks ago when we met with Joe, and it was done for Jason Fredericks over there. The biggest thing that I look at with this stuff here, the 223 that they came up with Vanguard in 2013 was probably not a bad price. It was fair, still a little bit high, and I think I was before you at that particular time. Right now they have it, it's up 67% since then, and it's at 371. We had a condo meeting the other night, and there's 12 people in these things, and there isn't one of them, from what I understand of this thing, that would sell for what this thing is, these are assessed at. They'd probably all sell, and for a lot less. There's a couple ways of looking at this. The only way you can come off this far with the values of these units is the model. Looking at this, I'm trying to understand this mass appraising. I have a Bible here, and it somewhat reflects Joe and Vanguard, the way they operate too. There's a whole chapter in here on mass appraising, and one of the first things that they do is they pick a model out, and they put these properties together to come up with valuations on certain properties. And you're supposed to compare it the same way with the income approach, the cost approach, and the comparable sales. And to come off this far on these particular units over there, there's got to be something wrong with that model. And I talked to them about that day. They wouldn't basically look at anything. They want to see this appraisal, and this appraisal basically comes in at about, I don't know, 30 to 40% less than what their valuations even were at that particular time. So this one here, when you get into the prism mode, everything gets distorted as it comes out. this value at, almost $200 a square foot is really distorted. The other thing that it doesn't take into consideration is the fact that the sales from the last quarter are lacking. The other thing is about 4 or 5 of these strip malls came on about that time, that Oliver Commons and those Roars over there by Menards over there. So the vacancy factors weren't ever figured in on these things. And as far as the sales, if you compare a 12-year-old building to new with completely different circumstances, you're going to get a skewed value. And to me, these things, they told us they would definitely adjust these, and they would give us a letter back saying that day when we were in here. Never got a letter back, never got a revaluation. Looked on the website today, and it went from 81 or 87 down to 371 on this particular unit. So what the appraisal said and what they did are two different things. So that was one of the issues here. And the second one, and I want to be quick about this, is the hub. And the hub up on the north side, Joe also said that he would meet with us on that. We'd figure this thing out. We were also supposed to get a cost breakdown from the accountant that hired a firm to do it. And it did not happen, and we don't have it yet. One thing that I know, though, is that the values that they're coming up with, $6.2 million on that particular piece, there isn't a gas station in town that is probably over that $2.5 million. There isn't one that I know of. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know of any, and I looked on the website. The other thing about that is that the land is valued at $2 million with improvements. We're not arguing about that. What our concern is that we got $400 a square foot on the balance of this, because we got about between $3.5 and $4 million in inventory in there, car wash equipment, that sort of stuff that is not a fixed property. Yeah. So we know the price is way off on this thing. The other thing is that we have no access, unbeknownst to us, and 99% of the people in this room. The city and us did not know that the development, when that was taken in, did not have water and sewer service to the thing. The only two people that probably knew were the developer and a former engineer, I would guess. And maybe I'm wrong there, Gene, but the long and the short of it is we never opened, they said that they would drop 10 or 15% off of that, just for the asking the other day when we were over there, and Joe said he stood by that Friday when he called me. So, but what happens is this thing never opened until the end of January, which was the 10%, 15% no matter what. The other thing is that we still don't have any access to the thing. We have water and sewer, and we opened it. We probably shouldn't have. We can't use the car wash. We can't use the diesel because you can't get a truck in there. You can't do a lot of things that it was designed to do. This thing is basically hemorrhaging money at this particular time. It's not your fault. But what I'm saying is the $6.5 million is way out of line on this, because we can't even finish it until the road and the other things get in there. It's a non-finishable piece of property. The other thing I tried to explain to them is, and you can actually do this, because I'm also a certified general appraiser. You can have depreciation on a new property, and you can have it just like any other property that's 20 or 40 years old. You can have depreciation. You can have external depreciation in about 2 minutes. Physical depreciation is really non-existent because the structure is somewhat new. But at $400 a square foot, it's not one of those. And the other thing is we have a pile of depreciation on that thing right now because we've got no access and we can't use the facility. So that's what I'm here before you today for. So any consideration I'd really appreciate.
Mr. Black, what is your estimated finish cost?
Pardon?
What do you think your number is going to be for at finished, when everything is?
When we get the cost segregation done, I know it's gonna be less than the 6.5 million, or 6 million that they put on it, but where I don't know, because it's a hit and miss deal. I know one thing, that if the land is at $2 or $2 million like Joe's got it at, which we don't have a problem with that, because that's in the ballpark. The thing that's a problem is the remaining piece, the buildings and that car wash. If I include that car wash building and the building there with the hub, it comes to $400 a square foot. And they keep telling me it comes from the cost models with Vanguard. They would not volunteer those. They would not let a person look at them. They put an arbitrary figure on here. Joe has the ability to take this thing and adjust it accordingly to the usage of this thing. It wasn't done. I took him up there in the mud the other day, kind of showed him that last Monday when it was raining, trying to give him an idea of what this thing was like when it's muddy, because everything comes onto the lot. You can't get in and out of the thing. I mean, it's tougher than heck, and it's not a good situation right now. And we realize that that road isn't going to get paved until the deadline on that is November 15th. So, you know, if I'm not mistaken, it's right in there somewhere. They thought they might have it done on November 1st or somewhere thereabout. So what we're asking is since we can't complete the project because you can't do the approaches, you can't do the landscape, you can't do nothing with it, and all it is a constant cleanup and an extra cost all the way through this thing, we would like to see some adjustment. And I don't think that's asking too much, and I hope you don't, because it's just not there yet. It's not worth $6 million. I know that.
You don't have the current costs of
The cost segregation, no.
construction.
Fisher, Brady Marks hired a firm to do the cost segregation, and it isn't done yet. And I don't have it, and I told Joe and Vanguard that I would get that, and I told Joe I can't get it because it's not done.
Okay.
So, you know, we've had some good conversations about this. It's just been, we're not on the same base. And part of it is we're up against the deadline, and we got some issues. So.
Going back to the Fairway States condos, you mentioned an appraisal. I think I heard you say that the appraisal you have was done in 2013,
It was done in December of 13.
December of 13.
And there's 4 units that were in here. And these things were at $123 a square foot. Right now, we're at almost $200 a square foot. On an income approach, they're supposed to use an income approach on this stuff, even on these models that they do on mass appraising. The only thing that I can see is normal. They sell on income stream. These buildings do, and you have to use it. An existing one with leases in place will sell on a business, on a income approach. No different than you're selling stock over there. If people are buying dividend-producing stock, what have you. Right now, these things are figured with Joe's valuation and the city's valuation, Vanguard. They're at about a 4.5% to 5% cap rate. You couldn't sell that for all love and money in the open market. You'd have to go to between an 8 and a 10% on a building like this to make it commensurate to the risk. And it's not even close on an income approach. So the other thing is of those 12 business owners that are over there, there's people with MBAs, there's people with investment people, there's real estate people, there's all kinds of cross-section of this city in there. There isn't one that wouldn't sell for that price, and it came out the other night. And it's kind of funny, it's laughable, but then it's not, because these values aren't close, you know. And my house went up considerably. I'm not arguing about any of this stuff. There's some of them that are good, some of them are wrong. And these two in particular, we've talked about, they said they would look at this appraisal and they adjusted it less than 5%, when it should have been adjusted about 35 to 40% in my book, looking at this, you know, if you went on a square footage even. And he has the income approach in here and the sales approach, he has the whole thing in here. It was done by certified general appraiser. This hub,
So what I'm trying to get at is what value did he come up with in December 2013 on a unit
he
here?
came up with $180, or no, $160,000 on a unit that Joe has, and this particular ones he had at, I think it was almost $300,000. They adjusted that one in particular because it was a doctor's office. It was Kilwine's podiatrist's office for Jason. And they thought it had multiple, just because it was a doctor, that it had multiple stations in it for water. The problem that I have with that, though, is they were here in its entirety and went through every unit over there that they could less than 2 years ago. And they didn't share the information, they didn't have the information in front of them the day when Vanguard was here. And to me, they knew all of this prior to. You can't do this every time the values jump up.
Mr. Blatt, excuse me, are you representing that entire
Yes.
block condo?
Yeah.
So not just 1 or 2 units in there? You're here representing,
I told them that I was coming here before this tax equalization board
do you,
Monday night when we had a meeting,
okay, so,
last Monday.
but you don't have an appraisal for every unit then in there? The appraisal you're referring to is for a specific
It has
unit,
2 units in there.
2
plus
units?
The 2 back ones, the Frederick's include the liquid assets and one other one back there. But the cost of these things, there's got to be something wrong with the business model for it to come out that far off. And I don't know how that happened, but I know the values are off. This thing, though, the hub, anything you can give us in consideration of that would be really great.
Well, let's take these one at a time here and give Mr. Hirschfield a chance to talk about the Fairway/States condos that he's referring to.
Mr. President, Commissioners, Mr. Bleth, those properties were all adjusted at our last board meeting. I believe those were given to Mr. Bleth, and nothing, I'm not prepared to speak on them any further. I believe we were in the neighborhood of a 10% decrease to the structure on each of those in there based upon the 2 or 3 appraisals that had been presented and the 2 additional sales, I believe, that had been in that group of buildings over the last 3 years.
So that was part of the group that we accepted on this meeting on the 16th?
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Colling, can we go back and change those if we so choose?
Mr. President, you do have plenary ability to correct and equalize the assessment rolls. So if you were so inclined, you would be available to you to correct an assessment on that roll if you deemed it necessary.
Okay. And do they all average about are they all about $371,000?
And no, they're different buildings, different uses. As I go through here, there's one at around 244,000, one on up to 476,000 would be liquid assets and the lounge over there. And so we've got a varying degree of prices.
Okay.
That's a different unit, though. I'm talking these State Avenue condos over there. There's different sizes in there. They range from 1,000 square feet to 2,400 difference. I mean, they're all that way. All 12 of them are that I'm there before. So.
And then the hub, do you have any comments to make on the hub?
The hub, we decreased 15% at the last meeting as well. As Mr. Bless stated, we were waiting for additional information that was not brought forward.
That
mentioned-
was brought forward on that.
I didn't see that appraisal there. But in regards to the hub, he talks about arbitrarily setting values. I did provide the property record card. It goes into detail every component of that building and how it's valued, and it's valued in a manner similar to everything else that's in Dickinson. That's done at a median cost of new buildings that have been constructed, which we've had several. Whether his costs come in lower than, I mean, that's a good business decision and for using the builder that they did. However, we value at the median level. If any additional obsolescence is warranted, I mean, you can argue the difficulty of getting in there after rains, maybe decreased traffic through there in sales, which may or may not affect the price of the property. That I was unable to find enough data in the short amount of time to warrant an additional decrease. Not saying that one isn't warranted, I just cannot support one at this time.
Couple comments. This appraisal was taken by Vanguard that day. And I don't know if you guys share information or what you guys do, but this was given here and they took copies of it. He picked it back up here. The other thing is getting to this hub, and that was on State Avenue condos. This was given to you guys. This hub situation there's some major issues there because you can't complete it. The other thing is this is 2014 valuation coming up for 2015. It's not done. We can't complete it. So, you know, this was my big argument to Joe is besides the depreciation, if you wanted to lump depreciation in there, you got to guesstimate this somehow because there's no sales you're going to find any way, shape, or form that will show this depreciation that happened on this hub. The other thing is that if it wasn't completed in 2014 and until 15 in the end of January when it opened, there is no possible way that, that 10-15%, that would be a given, that percentage that you did. My argument to Joe was that this thing has some issues because you can't use it. Maybe we shouldn't have opened it.
That's my question did we give a special occupancy permit when the landscaping's not done and the driveway's not done?
You gave us a building permit
I
without
know we have done some things
water and
for
sewer in
the
here.
street up there.
Right.
And it looks like you're trying to push it onto the city commission's fault. But if you remember, that's an expensive road in there. We've felt that we've done a lot of things for you.
We've had cooperation in here, and I don't fault that. I'm not saying that, but through this whole process, there has been extenuating circumstances on everybody's part, ours more than probably anybody's, and I'm not going to deny any fault on this thing as one of the investors. But it can't be completed this year. I mean, it's not going to get done until if it does, it's way late in the year.
So let me ask you a question again. I think I heard you say earlier that the car wash is not operational.
It's operational, but you can't use it because you can't wash it if you go drive on that dirt road.
Well, wait a minute. It's either operational or it isn't.
You could use
are you
it, but nobody
generating
will use it.
are you generating revenue from the car wash?
Very minimal.
Minimal, but you are generating revenue. So you are.
You can't. You can.
You're
use
probably
it.
not using it to
I
the
can
extent.
use it if I don't leave the lot. Otherwise, I mean, the car is as dirty by the time you leave as is there. So that's why it's not being used like it should be. It's not being used.
Okay. So I guess what I'm driving at is if it isn't complete, that would be one consideration. But I mean, if you are generating revenue with it, then wouldn't he have to value it on the basis of it being a complete property?
If this thing is supposed to generate enough to pay for the $350, it can't because of the way that the car is as dirty as you pulled up with it, within 5 minutes. So nobody's using it. You don't really have a customer base because everybody's mad about driving into this thing. We just have some issues. There's some depreciation there that doesn't show up on any of these cost models. The other thing is the $6.5 million or $6 million still comes up to $400 a square foot for the remaining buildings, and it's just not there. Nowhere's close, So
I could.
Mr. Jackson?
I really am glad to hear you acknowledge that, that the city did try to help you out.
I think
Very-
everybody's bent over backwards to accommodate us,
So,
too.
let's go by that. My question for Mr. Hirschfeld is this. I think in the past, we've had some residential properties that have been damaged or, I don't remember exactly the issue that we've recognized in valuation. Obsolescence, I think, is the right word. Is it a similar situation possibly here, or is that
Mr. Commissioner Jackson, it certainly is, and that's where that 15% that we applied to it was.
you think that
I mean, for all intents
recognized-
and purposes, the building's complete, the parking lot's complete, maybe the approaches aren't. I don't know how much you want to consider the landscaping into this valuation, but if you consider 15% of a $6.5 million structure, I mean, is that all going to go to those unfinished items, or some of that then accommodate
Okay, so,
the decrease?
so the answer is you think that the 15% probably recognized,
It
What-
recognizes some, if not all, yes.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Is there anyone else that would like to address the commission? If so, again, just come to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. Is there anybody else? Okay, if there's no one else, we'll close the public portion. And Mr. Colling, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we have left to do then is to act on the list of properties that was included in our on our computer here, and the one additional property or that Mr. Hirschfeld gave to us in written form. And then if we care to make any adjustments here to Mr. Bleth's properties.
That's correct, Mr. President, yes.
Mr. President, one additional item, we do have the gentleman from California who sent an email protest in, if this is the time to give consideration to his request.
If you have another one, by all means, you should bring it to our attention.
And that would have been under item 5. And the enclosure one was the email that he sent. His concern was the fact that we had an appraisal of the property for right-of-way access. That I guess the agreed amount for that was $3.70, and then the appraisal by Vanguard stated that the land up there is $4 a square foot. He was upset that there was a difference there. However, when you look at it in a closer level, there was some discounts, some obsolescence given to those properties for being vacant and not being developed, and that resulted in that valuation being $3.67. I support not doing any changes to that property for that reason. I mean, we're within 3 cents a square foot on that land, and I don't understand where his concern comes from, but I did tell him that I would bring his concern before the board, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. Does anyone have a question or comment regarding this particular item? Okay, well then I think what's before you is if any one of you would care to make a recommendation regarding either one of Mr. Bleth's requests.
Mr. President, I'm still a little confused whether, Mr. Bleth, whether you're representing the whole condo association. But we don't have what each condo unit is listed for and so on. I mean,
What's that
We
now?
can't go on a gross amount for the total condo association. We have to have a breakdown for each unit, do we not? I mean, you're talking about 2 units.
I'm talking about those 12 units over there in State Avenue condos, and as long as what I'm hearing, we talked about that last week at the meeting, that I've got to come back anyway because the values weren't adjusted if we didn't get a notice back. We were told by Vanguard and Joe that we were going to get a notice back, taking these down a minimal of 10 to 15%. I thought. What happened was, is it went down out of 300 and from 387 on my particular one that I looked at today, went down to 371. So it went down $15,000, not 15% or 10% or 5%. It never even came down close to that, you know. So, and that was why, as long as I was coming in here in the hub, this had to be brought up, because there's only one way you can get off from the values that far on existing property that's 12 to 15 years old like that. It has to do with the model that they prepare. We don't have access to it. It's no different than the hub. They tell us this is what our models are. Vanguard told us. Joe didn't do it. Nobody talked to us about it or where they came up with these numbers. I know one thing, that thing there in particular, there isn't a gas station more than $2.5 million in the city of Dickinson or its surrounding area, even the new truck stop. So I'm just saying that there's something wrong with what's going on here, and I don't know what it is on these particular properties. I'm not going to get into other ones, but the ones that I'm associated with, I see this, and I'm just asking for some kind of consideration for that.
Mr. President, is it enclosure VG? Theirs is listed?
That is correct, Commissioner Dicker.
Okay.
And
There is a breakdown, Commissioner Carson Steiner.
Unit?
Enclosure VG.
And I would like to comment to Mr. Bleth here. The website has not been updated, so there would not have been a change on that yet. And also, the notices will go out after the board has completed their work, so we haven't sent any notices out either.
The thing I look at on that hub, is the most glaring thing, it's not complete. You can't complete it because the approaches aren't there. You can't do any landscaping, you can't get any appeal out of this thing. The other thing is that the $2 million of the $6 million, $2 million is on the land, that leaves $4 million left. I know for a positive fact, it never came close to $400 a square foot to include the car wash building. Because the hub itself is only 7,000 square feet, and then the car wash is another 3,000 or 4,000. So it's just, it's really high. I know this is supposed to be equalization, and it shouldn't feel like, it's the other way around. I know there's depreciation on it, sitting there, because you can't utilize it and utilize the facility that you have there. So it's got started off with depreciation. Some of this depreciation could go away down the road when it gets completed.
So on the hub, we've gone from about 7 million to 6 million, 15%.
Commissioner Jackson, on the hub, we went from 6,200,000 to 5,600,000.
Okay.
And does that include the land?
That does include the land.
So that's about 10%.
So what's it,
Well,
where's
the
the
15%
6.2
is on the
number?
structure.
Where's this?
Okay.
We're at 5.6,
We're at 5.6,
including the land.
including the land.
Where's this 6.2 number come from that
That's what
Mr.
they were at. And then they said they were going to drop it more, and they were going to reassess this thing and look at us, and go through the numbers with us. Because I was telling them the day that we met with them, the day before the last meeting, there was depreciation on this thing immediately. And the other thing is, it wasn't done in 2015 and opened in the end of January. And we can't complete the rest of it right now, even if we wanted to. And those are the approaches going in there. Any of the landscaping on both sides. We can't redo that ditch. There's a lot of it's an ugly mess right now.
You know, I think everybody understands that.
Yeah.
And, it makes sense to me that we recognize some obsolescence there, again, if I'm using the right word, like we have done on some other properties over the years. But it sounds like we've done that. So the debate, I suppose, is it enough? In other words, we're recognizing, Gary, what you're saying.
Well,
And if you look at the math, you know, it went from 6.2 million to 5.6 million. You have agreed that the land is 2 million of that, so then they are evaluating the buildings at 3.6 million. I would suspect that it cost more than 3.6 million to put the structures on there that you did.
I don't believe it did, because when you start talking about $3 to $4 million for inventory and equipment, that's about it. But the biggest thing about that is Clayton, they said that, they asked me to come up with a number the day that I was sitting in there, and I told Joe I was wrong the following week when we picked each other up. I said that there was probably about 15% or so left to be completed. And there probably is minimal of that, but you can't, the obsolescence built in it is far higher than that. In other words, of the total cost that goes in here, there's a minimal of 50, it's not complete. Usually this thing gets taxed in its entirety when the project is complete. It's not complete.
You must have a number in mind. What was your
I
number?
really don't. Joe asked me that, and I'll give him that. Joe and I kind of get along when we're outside of situations like this, because we're both appraisers. We understand where the other one's coming from. And, you know, I told him that, you know, I would go half. I thought it was half, and I thought we had a kind of an agreement when we parted that day. And he called me Friday and said no, so that was when I knew. And I asked him when this meeting was, and I had to come before.
Okay, the project isn't quite complete. If we gave an additional allowance, and I guess I'm asking this both ways, if we reduce the 5.6 to something else, and the project does get complete this year, if market conditions stay the same as they are today or improve, is it likely that that property would increase in value back to where you have it?
And Mr. President, Commissioners, that is correct. I didn't have enough data to support an additional increase, whether you went 25%, whether you went half or 50% like Mr. Bleth says. I mean, certainly you can bring in 10 different appraisers, you'd have 10 different answers.
And none of us are appraisers here, but so for example, if we agreed to reduce the value from 5.6, and I'm just going to give an example, to 5.2, a year from now, when everything is complete, that 5.2 could be back up to 5.6 or something else.
That is correct.
What I would like
Do you understand that that's the way it works too? I mean,
What I would like to do, I appreciate your consideration on this, and I'll go through the cost segregation numbers with him. I can't give them to him, but I can show him what the cost was on when we get that in June.
but Mr. Bleth, we're either going to take the value as it is tonight and you're locked in, or we could make a change. I mean, it would have helped
I'd
us
love
out if you'd have had.
any kind of change you can make, we really
Okay,
appreciate
but I
it.
mean, when we're done tonight, I think we're done.
Okay.
Okay, I mean,
If that's what you're offering, I would say we accept.
I'm not offering, I was asking how the process worked, and I wanted to use a number, but I mean, you understand the process too, that a year from now, when you're complete, they're gonna look at it differently, and you, so for example, in my example, if we went down to $5.2 million and next year they raise it to 5.6, you're not gonna be in here complaining about
No,
the-
I understand this.
Yeah, okay.
What we're gonna do, and Joe and I have agreed to this already, is that we're going to, when we get the cost segregation done, sit down with him and we're gonna go through this. This should have been done all along on this whole project, and it wasn't done, you know? And, you know, granted, you guys are busy, you know, but somebody should have sat down instead of bombing us with the 6 when it's not done. And it wasn't done until January to begin with.
Okay.
Well, that's why we have the process, but,
Yep.
you know, it may not be 5.6 that it goes back to, it may be 6.
Could
or
be, yeah.
6.2.
Who knows?
He's already done 15, right?
Right, it'll be, but once the project is considered finished, you know, I guess I could accept lowering this value some just because I would buy in that it's not completely finished.
And we can't finish it.
And so in that sense, it's impaired. And so, you know, we're just, you know, the debate, as Mr. Jackson said earlier, is not whether or not it should come down, but how much it should come down. Mr. Hirschfield brought it down $600,000. I could accept a little higher number myself, you know, in terms of the discount, the impairment.
I would be okay with the 10%, at 5,612,400, 10%. I'm doing the math right here. We'll take it down to the 5,051,400. I feel comfortable with that.
You're comfortable at 5 million what?
5,051,400.
5,051,400. That sounds pretty precise, Mr. Steiner. Anybody else?
President Johnson, if
Mr.
I may,
President.
just want to make two comments. First, thank you for acknowledging, I think in your words, the city bent over backwards to get
You
you
guys
this.
still a lot of work out.
Yeah, to get this thing open. We had several meetings to try and
You got to
work.
be good friends.
I just want to make a comment to Commissioner Oltman's point. Throughout those meetings, this project was referred to as a $10 million project by Mr. Fitter several times. I heard them use that number. I don't know what the end number is, never saw any figures, but that was the figure that he used at least 3 times during the meetings that we held.
Part of it is the 10 million you got to understand, and that's where we kept coming up with that, was the $3.5 to $4 million in the cost segregation and equipment and the other odds and ends that are in there that aren't included in the real estate. And you have to understand that part of it, because, you know, when you're said and done, it probably is close to that number, you know, probably right on. But I'm saying that the rest of this, until the cost segregation gets done, and we can't utilize the facility because we can't finish it, and it's not finished, and it wasn't finished till the end of January anyway, which is 2015 is the year we're talking about. So there's some extenuating circumstances here, Sean.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Mr. Blath, I think I'd have trouble voting for Mr. Steiner's number, but I could vote for the 5.2.
I like the 5.2 better.
Yeah.
Mr. Steiner, I got some votes over here on my end of the table.
Need to hear a motion.
Now, having said that, I don't think he made a compelling argument on the Fairway States Avenue condos, and I wouldn't vote for any change there.
No, we made adjustments to those properties and actually pretty good changes to each one of them. When you look at the value before and the value after, we made concessions on each one of those properties.
So I guess from my perspective, I would be looking for a motion to amend the hub valuation from the 5.6 to the $5.2 million.
Make the motion to amend to 5.2.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. We'll vote. Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Does anyone care to make a motion amending the values on the Fairway States Avenue condos?
I'd make a motion to decline amending those values. Let them go as Joe has been for.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. And I think the last thing we have to do is to accept the changes that the assessor made or presented to us at this meeting, the additional changes. Is there a better way to word that, Mr. Colling?
It's
President, I think your motion would be to accept the changes that Mr. Hirschfeld's office has indicated and confirm the assessment rolls.
There's your motion. Does anyone care to move that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Yeah, we added, there was a late one that we added to that, is that right?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Commissioner Jackson, there,
That's what this one, that includes this.
yes.
Okay.
So. Any other discussion? Who moved that motion? Mr. Altman did? Okay. There's no other discussion. We'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Decker?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Is there any more business for us to do as Board of Equalization? Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Motion carries. We stand adjourned. The City Commission meeting will start in about 10 minutes.